The dust hung thick in the air as Thomas Keller stepped off the stagecoach into Porterville, California, squinting against the harsh August sun of 1878, and immediately knew something violent was about to unfold in the center of town, where two men circled each other with hands hovering over their gun belts. The crowd had formed a wide ring around them, faces tense with anticipation and dread, the kind of spectacle that drew everyone from the saloon to the street, but sent decent folk scrambling to pull their children inside. Thomas recognized the type immediately after 6 years of working cattle drives from Texas to Montana. One man was a hothead young ranch hand, barely more than a boy, with wild eyes and trembling fingers. The other was a weathered gunslinger with cold calculation written across his scarred face, the kind who had killed before and would kill again without losing a night's sleep over it. Thomas had come to Porterville seeking honest work and a chance to settle down after years of drifting. He had saved enough money to buy a small piece of land, maybe start his own modest ranch, find a wife who could tolerate his rough edges, and build something permanent for once in his life. At 26 years old, he was tired of sleeping under stars and eating dust, tired of watching friends die young and stupid over cards or cattle or women who were not worth dying for. This town seemed as good as any other, nestled in the San Joaquin Valley with rich soil and decent people who worked hard for what they had. But now he was watching another senseless death about to happen at high noon, and he felt the familiar disgust rise in his throat. He started to turn away, unwilling to witness what came next, when a woman pushed through the crowd with determination that parted the wall of bodies like Moses at the Red Sea. She was not what anyone expected. Petite and proper in a simple calico, dressed the color of prairie flowers, with dark hair pinned up beneath a modest bonnet. She looked like she belonged in a church pew or a schoolroom rather than stepping between two armed men ready to paint the street red. Thomas felt his breath catch as she walked straight into the line of fire with her chin up and her hands clasped calmly in front of her. "Stop this nonsense right now," she said, and her voice carried across the sudden silence with bell-clear authority that made even the gunslinger hesitate. "Jacob Harper, your mother is sitting in that church praying for your soul while you stand here ready to throw your life away over a card game." The young ranch hand, Jacob, flushed red and his hand wavered. "He called me a cheat, Miss Penelope. I cannot let that stand. Cannot or will not." She turned to face him fully, ignoring the dangerous man at her back with a courage that made Thomas's heart hammer against his ribs. "Because it seems to me you have a choice right now between dying proud or living humble, and I know which one your mother would choose for you." "The boy cheated," the gunslinger drawled, and Thomas saw his hand twitch toward his weapon. "You best step aside, miss, before you get hurt." Penelope turned to him with the same calm composure, though Thomas could see the slight tremor in her fingers that betrayed her fear. "Did you see him cheat with your own eyes, or did you just lose and need someone to blame?" The gunslinger's eyes narrowed. "You calling me a liar? I am calling you a man who has killed enough people that one more would not trouble your conscience," she said softly. "But Jacob is 19 years old, and he has never drawn on anyone in his life. You would shoot him down like a dog, and everyone here knows it. Is that the reputation you want? Killing boys barely old enough to shave." Something shifted in the crowd's energy. Men who had been hungry for violence now looked uncomfortable, ashamed. Thomas found himself stepping forward without deciding to, his own hand instinctively near his gun in case the situation turned worse. He caught Penelope's eye for just a moment and saw intelligence there, calculation, the realization that she had turned the crowd's sentiment and was pressing her advantage. "Jacob, apologize for whatever you said that started this," she commanded. "And you, sir, will accept that apology and walk away, or you will have to explain to every person in this town why you murdered a boy in cold blood after being given a peaceful way out." The silence stretched thin as wire. Thomas watched the gunslinger's face, saw pride war with pragmatism, saw him recognize that he had lost something more important than the fight. Finally, he spat in the dust and holstered his weapon with deliberate slowness. "The boy apologizes. We are done," he said. "But you got a sharp tongue, miss. Someone ought to teach you to mind it. And you have a quick trigger finger," she replied evenly. "But perhaps today we both learned something about restraint." She turned to Jacob and gave him a look that would have withered a cactus. "Apologize. Now." "I am sorry," Jacob stammered, his face burning with humiliation and relief. "I spoke out of turn." The gunslinger shrugged and walked toward the saloon, the crowd parting silently before him. Jacob practically fled in the opposite direction, probably to face his mother's wrath, which Thomas suspected might be worse than any bullet. And Penelope stood in the center of the street, suddenly alone as the crowd dispersed, her shoulders sagging as the adrenaline drained away and left her shaking. Thomas found his feet carrying him toward her before his brain caught up. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I have ever witnessed," he said, and she looked up at him with eyes the color of honey in sunlight. "Probably both," she admitted, and her voice quavered now that the danger had passed. "I did not plan it. I just saw that boy about to die and I could not stand there and do nothing." "You could have been killed," Thomas said, and he heard the roughness in his own voice, the strange intensity of emotion for a woman he had never met before this moment. "But I was not." She managed a trembling smile. "And neither was Jacob, so I suppose it worked out." Thomas removed his hat, suddenly aware of how dusty and travel-worn he must look. "Thomas Keller," he said, "I just arrived in town about 5 minutes before you walked into that gunfight." "Penelope Morrison," she replied, and offered her hand with a formality that seemed absurd after what had just happened, but Thomas took it carefully and felt the warmth of her skin through her glove. "Welcome to Porterville, Mr. Keller. I apologize that your introduction to our town was quite so dramatic." "I have seen worse," he assured her, "but I have never seen anyone talk down a killer like that. Where did you learn to do such a thing?" she laughed, a sound like water over stones. "I taught school in San Francisco for 3 years before coming here. You learn quickly how to manage difficult personalities when you have 30 children in one room and half of them are trying to start fights. This was not so different, really, just higher stakes." "You are a schoolteacher," Thomas repeated, and it fit her perfectly. The calm authority, the way she had spoken to grown men like misbehaving students, the courage required to stand in front of people and demand better behavior than they intended to give. "I am, though we have a small school here. Only about 20 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old." She was recovering her composure now, the color returning to her cheeks. "What brings you to Porterville, Mr. Keller, besides an unexpected display of near violence?" "Looking to settle down," he said. "I have been working cattle drives for years, saved up enough to buy land. Thought I might try putting down roots somewhere." "That sounds wonderful," Penelope said, and her smile was genuine. "We need more people committed to building something lasting here. Too many are just passing through, looking for quick money or easy opportunities." Thomas wanted to keep talking to her, to find excuses to extend this conversation indefinitely, but he could see curious eyes watching them from windows and doorways. She must have noticed too, because she stepped back slightly and adjusted her bonnet. "I should go check on Jacob and his mother," she said. "But perhaps I will see you around town, Mr. Keller." "I would like that," Thomas said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. "And Miss Morrison, "What you did today was remarkable. That boy owes you his life." She flushed prettily and looked away. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Thomas said firmly. "Most people would have watched and done nothing. You are different." He watched her walk away toward the white-painted church at the end of the street, her dress swaying with each step, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. He had known women before, had even fancied himself in love a time or two, but this was different. This was recognition. This was seeing someone step into danger without hesitation, because it was the right thing to do, and knowing that such courage and conviction was rare and precious and worth everything. Thomas had watched Penelope Morrison talk a man out of a gunfight at noon, and he knew with absolute certainty that she was the one he had been searching for without knowing it all these years. The next few days passed in a blur of practical arrangements. Thomas found a room at the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman whose husband had worked on the railroad before dying in an accident 5 years prior. She ran a clean establishment and asked no questions, which Thomas appreciated. He visited the land office and began the process of purchasing 40 acres about 3 miles outside of town, good grazing land with a creek running through it, and enough timber to build a modest house and barn. But through all of this, Penelope was never far from his thoughts. He found himself inventing reasons to walk past the schoolhouse, a simple building near the church where he could hear her clear voice reading lessons through the open windows. He bought supplies at the general store and learned from the chatty proprietor that Miss Morrison had arrived in Porterville 6 months ago, that she boarded with the doctor's family, that she was 23 years old, and had come west after her father died, leaving her with no family back in San Francisco. Thomas was careful not to be obvious about his interest. He did not want to frighten her or come on too strong. But Porterville was a small town of maybe 400 people, and their paths crossed naturally and frequently. He encountered her at the general store where she was buying chalk and paper for the school, at the church social on Sunday where he had decided to attend despite not being particularly religious, at the town well where she was drawing water with several students helping her carry the buckets. Each time they spoke, Thomas felt his certainty deepen. Penelope was intelligent and thoughtful, with a quiet sense of humor that caught him off guard. She asked genuine questions about his plans for the ranch, about his years on the cattle drives, and she listened with real attention instead of the polite disinterest he had encountered from other women. She told him about her students, about the challenges of teaching such a wide range of ages in one room, about her hopes of eventually expanding the school to have 2 teachers and more resources. "Education is the foundation of civilization," she said as they stood together after church, watching the children play in the yard. "These children deserve every opportunity to learn and grow and become whatever they dream of becoming." "Even the girls?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious. He had known plenty of men who thought educating females beyond reading and basic arithmetic was a waste of resources. Penelope's eyes flashed. "Especially the girls. A woman with education has options. She can support herself if necessary, can make informed decisions about her life, can raise her own children with knowledge and wisdom. I will never understand why anyone would want to keep half the population ignorant and dependent." "My mother felt the same way," Thomas said quietly. "She taught me to read using her own books that she had brought from Boston. My father thought it was foolish, said a ranch hand did not need letters, but she insisted. She died when I was 12, but I have always been grateful she gave me that gift." Penelope's expression softened. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Thomas agreed. "You remind me of her, actually. that same determination to do what is right regardless of what others think. 2 weeks after Thomas arrived in Porterville, he finally worked up the courage to ask Penelope if he could court her properly. He cleaned up carefully, borrowed a decent suit coat from another boarder, and presented himself at the doctor's house with his hat in his hands and his heart hammering like a blacksmith's anvil. Dr. William Foster answered the door, a graying man in his 50s with kind eyes and careful hands. Thomas had met him briefly at church and knew him to be respected in the community. "Mr. Keller," the doctor said with a knowing smile, "I had a feeling you might come calling. Please come in." The doctor's house was comfortable and clean, filled with books and medical instruments and the pleasant smell of bread baking. "Mrs. Foster greeted him warmly and went to fetch Penelope, who appeared a moment later looking surprised and pleased, wearing a dress of soft blue that brought out the gold in her eyes. "Mr. Keller," she said, "this is unexpected." "I apologize for not sending word ahead," Thomas said, acutely aware of the doctor and his wife watching with barely concealed interest. "But I was hoping I might speak with you, and with Dr. Foster, about something important." They settled in the parlor, Thomas perched uncomfortably on a delicate chair that seemed far too small for his frame. He had faced down angry bulls and violent drunks without this level of nervousness, but asking to court a woman felt far more dangerous to his heart than any physical threat. "Dr. Foster, Mrs. Foster, I would like your permission to court Penelope," he said directly, figuring honesty was the best approach. "I know I have only been in town a short time, but I am serious about settling here. I have purchased land and I intend to build a ranch and a life. I am not a wealthy man, but I am hardworking and honest, and I believe I could make Penelope happy if she would give me the chance." Dr. Foster exchanged a glance with his wife. "What does Penelope think about this?" he asked gently, all eyes turned to her. She was blushing, but her gaze was steady. "I would like to know Mr. Keller better," she said carefully. "He seems to be a good man, and I appreciate his directness. If you have no objections, I would be open to proper courtship." Mrs. Foster smiled. "We have no objections at all. Penelope is like a daughter to us, and we want to see her happy. But Thomas, you should know that she values honesty and respect above all else. Treat her well, or you will answer to us." "I would expect nothing less," Thomas said, feeling relief wash over him, "and I promise to honor your trust." After that evening, Thomas and Penelope began spending time together within the proper bounds of courtship. He would walk her home from school in the afternoons, carrying her books and listening to her talk about her day. They attended church together on Sundays and the various social events that punctuated small-town life. He brought her wildflowers from the land he was preparing to build on, and she baked him apple pie using fruit from the doctor's trees. The more time Thomas spent with Penelope, the more certain he became. She was everything he had not known he was searching for. She challenged him intellectually, made him laugh, listened to his dreams with genuine enthusiasm. She did not flinch from the reality of ranch life, did not expect him to be anything other than what he was. When he told her about the hard years after his mother died, about the violence he had witnessed and the loneliness of the cattle trails, she did not judge him but offered quiet understanding. "We all carry our pasts with us," she said one evening as they sat on the doctor's porch watching the sun set over the valley. "What matters is what we do with those experiences, whether we let them make us bitter or whether we use them to become wiser and more compassionate. Which are you?" Thomas asked. "Bitter or wise?" She considered the question seriously. "I am trying to be wise," she said. "When my father died, I was angry at the world. He was only 52 and he was a good man who deserved more years. But being angry did not bring him back, and it did not help me build a life for myself. So I chose to honor him by doing something meaningful with the education he had given me. Coming here, teaching these children, it feels like a way of passing forward the gift he gave me." Thomas reached for her hand and she let him take it, her fingers small and warm in his palm. "I think you are very wise," he said quietly, "and very brave, not just because of the gunfight, but because you chose hope over bitterness. That is harder than facing down any armed man." She squeezed his hand gently. "You chose the same thing. You could have kept drifting, kept running from the pain of losing your mother and everything stable, but you decided to put down roots instead. That takes its own kind of courage." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to deep blue, and Thomas felt a peace he had never known before. This was what home felt like. Not a place, but a person. Not four walls, but the quiet certainty of being understood and accepted and valued. As summer turned to fall, Thomas worked on building his ranch with single-minded determination. He hired a crew to help construct a sturdy house and barn, choosing practical designs that would withstand the valley's hot summers and mild but wet winters. He purchased cattle from a rancher who was moving north to Oregon, good breeding stock that would form the foundation of his herd. He planted a vegetable garden and an orchard of young fruit trees that would not bear for years, but represented faith in the future. Through all of this, Penelope was his constant support. She helped him choose paint colors for the house, insisted on a large kitchen window that would provide good light, suggested building a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings. She never presumed that she would be living there, never pushed him toward a proposal, but Thomas saw the hope in her eyes and loved her all the more for her patience. He wanted everything to be right before he asked her to marry him. He wanted to offer her a real home, not just dreams and promises. He wanted to prove that he could build something lasting and secure, that she would not be taking a risk on a drifter who might get restless and leave. But what he had not planned for was the trouble that arrived in October in the form of the gunslinger Penelope had faced down in August. His name was Silas Vaughn, and he returned to Porterville drunk and angry and looking for revenge. Thomas was in the general store when he heard the shouting from the street, and his blood ran cold when he recognized Vaughn's voice demanding to know where that sharp-tongued schoolteacher had gotten to. Thomas was out the door in seconds, his hand on his gun, and saw Vaughn standing in the middle of the street with a bottle in one hand and violence written across his face. A crowd was forming, people drawn by the noise but keeping their distance, and Thomas saw fear in their eyes. Whatever lawlessness Porterville usually avoided, Vaughn brought with him like a disease. "You want the teacher, you go through me," Thomas said, stepping into Vaughn's line of sight. His voice was calm, but his muscles were coiled tight, ready. Vaughn squinted at him. "I know you. You were here last time. Another one of her protectors," he laughed, harsh and bitter. "That woman made me look like a fool, made me back down in front of the whole town. Nobody does that to Silas Vaughn." "She saved you from murdering a boy," Thomas said evenly. "You should be thanking her, not threatening her." "I do not need saving," Vaughn spat. "And I do not need some drifter telling me what I should do." "Where is she?" "School is in session," Thomas said, "and you are not going anywhere near those children." Something dangerous flickered in Vaughn's eyes. "You going to stop me?" Thomas felt the familiar cold calm settle over him, the one that had kept him alive through too many dangerous situations to count. "If I have to." "Thomas, no." Penelope's voice rang out, and Thomas's heart sank as she hurried toward them from the direction of the schoolhouse. "Do not do this. Go back to your students," Thomas said without taking his eyes off Vaughn. "This is not your concern." "It absolutely is my concern if two men are about to kill each other over something I did," she said. and she positioned herself between them just as she had with Jacob, that same fearless conviction radiating from her small frame. "Mr. Vaughn, I am sorry if I embarrassed you in August. That was not my intention. I simply wanted to prevent violence." "Little late for that," Vaughn said, but he lowered his gun hand slightly, confused by her apology. "I know," Penelope said, "but it is not too late now. You can walk away. You can let this go. You can choose to be bigger than your pride." "He is drunk," Thomas said quietly. "Reasoning with him will not work this time." But Penelope ignored him, keeping her focus on Vaughn. "What happened to you?" she asked, and her voice was gentle now, curious rather than confrontational. "What made you so angry that you spend your life looking for fights?" Vaughn blinked, thrown off balance. "What? You are clearly intelligent," she continued. "You speak well, you carry yourself with confidence. You could be anything, do anything. But instead you drift from town to town looking for excuses to kill people. Why?" "That is none of your concern," Vaughn said, but some of the fire had gone out of his voice. "Maybe not," Penelope agreed, "but I am asking anyway. Because I think somewhere underneath all that anger is a person who got hurt and never healed. And I think you are tired of being that person, even if you do not know how to stop." Thomas watched Vaughn's face, saw emotions flicker there too fast to identify. Grief, maybe. Regret. A bone-deep weariness that spoke of too many years living hard and violent. "You do not know anything about me," Vaughn said, but it sounded like a defense rather than an accusation. "You are right," Penelope said, "but I would like to. Would you come have coffee with me? Let me apologize properly, and you can tell me your story if you want to. Or not. But either way, maybe we can part as something better than enemies." "This is a bad idea," Thomas said, but Penelope shot him a look that clearly said to trust her. Vaughn stared at her for a long moment, then laughed, a sound that held genuine amusement rather than cruelty. "You are something else, lady. You know that, I've been told," Penelope said with a small smile. "So what do you say? Coffee?" Vaughn holstered his gun with a shake of his head. "1 cup. But if you try to convert me to being a better man or some such nonsense, I am leaving." "No conversion," Penelope promised. "Just coffee and conversation." Thomas followed them to the small restaurant next to the general store, determined not to let Penelope out of his sight. He sat at a nearby table while she and Vaughn talked quietly, too low for him to hear most of it. But he watched Vaughn's body language gradually relax, saw the hardness leave his face. After an hour, Vaughn stood and touched his hat to Penelope with surprising courtesy. "You are a strange woman, Miss Morrison, but I appreciate you hearing me out. I will not trouble you or this town again." "I hope you find what you are looking for," Penelope said sincerely. "Peace, if nothing else." Vaughn nodded once, then walked out without another word. Thomas watched him mount his horse and ride south out of town, and only then did he release the breath he had been holding. He joined Penelope at her table, and she looked up at him with tired eyes. "You are angry with me," she said. "I am terrified for you," Thomas corrected. "You keep putting yourself in danger, and one of these days your courage is going to get you killed." "Would you rather I had let you face him?" she asked. "Let you risk dying over me?" "Yes," Thomas said bluntly. "I would die for you without hesitation, Penelope. But the thought of losing you is unbearable." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I cannot stand by and do nothing when I might be able to help. It is not who I am, and if you care about me, you need to understand that." Thomas looked at their joined hands, at her determined face, and felt something break open in his chest. "I more than care about you," he said roughly. "I love you. I have loved you since the moment you walked into that gunfight, and I knew you were the bravest person I had ever met. And I will spend the rest of my life terrified for you and proud of you and completely in awe of you if you will have me. Penelope's eyes widened, then filled with tears. That was not a very romantic proposal. It was not a proposal, Thomas said. It was just the truth. The proposal will come when I have finished the house and can offer you something real. I do not need a finished house, Penelope said softly. I need you, and yes, I will have you. I love you too, Thomas. You are good and honest, and you see me for who I really am instead of who you wish I would be. That is rarer than you know. Thomas stood and pulled her to her feet, then kissed her right there in the middle of the restaurant while the owner and 2 customers watched with open interest. He did not care. He had found the woman he wanted to spend his life with, and she loved him back, and nothing else mattered. They were married in November in the small church where Penelope had gone to pray after her first encounter with violence. The whole town attended, it seemed, eager to celebrate the couple who had become part of Porterville's own folklore. Jacob Harper, the young ranch hand Penelope had saved, served as one of Thomas's witnesses, along with several of the men who had helped build the ranch. Penelope's students filled the front pews, scrubbed clean and dressed in their finest clothes, watching their teacher with wide, delighted eyes. Dr. Foster walked Penelope down the aisle, and Thomas felt his throat tighten as he saw her approaching in a simple but elegant dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Foster had helped her sew. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was his partner, his equal, his home. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Penelope with all the love and promise he could pour into the gesture, and the church erupted in applause. The celebration afterward was lively, with food and music and dancing that lasted until well after dark. Thomas danced with his new wife, holding her close and marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. Friends and neighbors offered congratulations and advice, most of it humorous and some of it actually useful. As the evening wound down, Thomas and Penelope slipped away to the ranch, to the house that was finally finished and ready to become a home. Thomas carried her over the threshold, making her laugh, and set her down gently in the kitchen where moonlight streamed through the window she had insisted on. "Welcome home, Mrs. Keller," he said, and Penelope smiled up at him with such joy that he felt his heart might burst. "Welcome home," she echoed, and kissed him. That night they made the house theirs in every way, learning each other with tenderness and passion, building the foundation of their marriage with touch and whispered words and laughter. Thomas had been with women before, but this was different. This was love, real and deep and transformative. This was coming home. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a happy one. Penelope continued teaching through the winter, riding into town each morning in the small buggy Thomas had bought for her, and returning each evening to help with the endless work of running a ranch. She learned to cook on the wood stove, laughing at her early disasters and gradually improving until she could produce meals that were not just edible but genuinely good. Thomas learned to be less solitary, to share his space and his thoughts, to ask for help when he needed it instead of stubbornly trying to do everything himself. They talked endlessly, about everything and nothing. Penelope told him about her childhood in San Francisco, about her father's bookshop and the endless hours she had spent reading everything she could find. Thomas told her about growing up on a hardscrabble ranch in Texas, about the father who had been distant and sometimes cruel, about his mother's quiet strength, and the books she had treasured. They shared their fears and hopes, their past hurts and future dreams, building intimacy through honesty and trust. In the spring, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over their land, and he felt joy and terror in equal measure. The thought of being a father was overwhelming, but the thought of having a child with Penelope, of creating a family together, felt like the fulfillment of every dream he had not known he carried. "Are you scared?" Penelope asked, reading his expression accurately. "Terrified," Thomas admitted. "What if I am a terrible father? What if I am like my own father and cannot show love properly?" "You will not be," Penelope said with absolute certainty. "You have more love in you than you realize, Thomas. I see it every day in how you treat the animals, how you help neighbors, how you take care of me. Our child will be lucky to have you as a father." "I hope you are right," Thomas said, and pulled her close, protective and grateful and full of hope. Penelope continued teaching through the spring, determined to finish the school year before taking time for the baby. Her students were excited about the coming child, the younger ones asking endless questions about babies and where they came from, which Penelope answered with scientific accuracy that made some of the more conservative parents uncomfortable but which Thomas found endlessly amusing. In June, the school year ended and Penelope focused on preparing for motherhood. Thomas converted one of the spare rooms into a nursery, building a cradle from oak and sanding it smooth as silk. Penelope sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands working with steady patience even as her belly swelled and her back ached. Mrs. Foster visited regularly to check on her progress and offer advice, and other women from town brought food and supplies and their own stories of childbirth and motherhood. Thomas found himself grateful for the community they had built. Porterville was not perfect, but it was home, and the people here had welcomed them and supported them. When he had first arrived less than a year ago, he had been alone and rootless. Now he had a wife he adored, a ranch that was beginning to thrive, and a child on the way. He had everything he had never dared to hope for. The baby came on a hot August afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after Thomas had first arrived in Porterville. Dr. Foster attended the birth along with his wife and 2 other experienced women from town, while Thomas paced outside the bedroom door and tried not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. He had seen animals give birth countless times, knew it was natural and usually safe, but this was Penelope and his child, and the stakes felt impossibly high. When he finally heard the baby's cry, thin and outraged, Thomas felt his knees go weak with relief. Mrs. Foster opened the door moments later, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she said. "And Penelope did wonderfully. Come meet your boy." Thomas entered the room on shaking legs and found Penelope propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face and held out the baby. "Thomas, come see him," she whispered. "He is perfect." Thomas approached carefully, afraid he might break something through sheer clumsiness, and looked down at the tiny red face of his son. The baby had a surprising amount of dark hair and eyes that were squinted shut, and his little fists waved in the air as if already ready to fight the world. "He is so small," Thomas said inadequately, and everyone laughed. "Here," Penelope said, "hold him." She placed the baby in Thomas's arms, showing him how to support the head, and Thomas felt his entire world narrow down to this moment. His son. His child. A whole new person who depended on him and Penelope for everything, who would grow and learn and become his own man, who represented hope and possibility and the future. "Hello," Thomas said softly to the baby. "I am your father, and I promise I will do my best by you." The baby yawned, showing pink gums, and somehow that tiny gesture made Thomas fall completely in love. They named him Theodore, after Thomas's mother, whose full name had been Theodora, and gave him the middle name of William after Dr. Foster. Theo, as they quickly began calling him, was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he had a powerful set of lungs that he exercised regularly at night. Thomas and Penelope took turns walking the floor with him, singing lullabies and telling stories, learning the rhythms of parenthood together. Thomas discovered that he loved being a father. He loved watching Theo discover the world, the way his eyes would focus on faces and light and movement, the way he would grasp Thomas's finger with surprising strength. He loved coming in from working the ranch to find Penelope nursing the baby by the window, sunlight turning her hair to gold and peace on her face. He loved the three of them together as a family, complete and whole. Penelope did not return to teaching that fall. They discussed it at length, weighing her desire to continue her work against the practical realities of caring for an infant and helping run the ranch. In the end, she decided to take at least a year away from the schoolhouse, though she continued to tutor several of her older students at the ranch in the afternoons, and she began writing a series of educational primers that she hoped to publish for use in small rural schools. Life settled into new patterns. The ranch grew steadily as Thomas proved himself a skilled cattleman, and Penelope managed the household with the same competence she brought to everything else. They hired a young man named Daniel to help with the heavier work, giving Thomas more time to spend with his family. Neighbors became friends, casual acquaintances deepened into real relationships, and the Keller Ranch became known as a place of hospitality and honest dealing. Theo grew from infant to toddler to a boisterous little boy who followed his father everywhere and peppered his mother with endless questions. He had Thomas's dark hair and Penelope's golden eyes, and he had inherited both his mother's curiosity and his father's quiet determination. Thomas taught him to ride before he was 4, sitting him on the gentlest horse and walking alongside, and Penelope taught him letters and numbers, delighting in his quick mind and hunger to learn. When Theo was 3, Penelope became pregnant again. This time the fear was less and the joy more immediate. Thomas knew what to expect now, and he trusted that Penelope could handle the challenges of childbirth again. Their second child, a daughter they named Patricia, arrived on a mild spring morning with far less drama than Theo's birth. She was tiny and perfect, with wispy blonde hair and a calm temperament that was the opposite of her brother's energy. Thomas fell in love all over again, this time with a daughter who looked at him with total trust and wrapped his heart around her little finger. Penelope laughed at how protective he became, how he worried about everything that might harm Patricia, but she understood. Having children had changed them both, had given them something precious to protect and nurture. The years flowed past like water, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, hot summers when the creek ran low and they had to carefully manage water. There were illnesses that frightened them, accidents that could have been tragic but somehow turned out all right, moments of frustration and exhaustion and doubt. But there were far more moments of happiness. Theo starting school and coming home each day full of stories. Patricia taking her first steps straight into Thomas's arms. Family dinners around the table Thomas had built with his own hands. Evenings on the porch watching the children play while Thomas and Penelope sat close together and counted their blessings. The ranch prospered through hard work and careful management. Thomas expanded the herd, improved the grazing land, built new structures and repaired old ones. Penelope kept detailed records of expenses and income, managed their small vegetable garden and growing orchard, preserved food for winter, and made their money stretch further than Thomas would have thought possible. Together they built something solid and lasting, a legacy for their children and a testament to what could be achieved through partnership and love. When Theo was 12, and Patricia was 9. Penelope surprised Thomas by announcing that she was pregnant again. They had thought their family was complete, had settled into the comfortable rhythms of life with 2 children who were increasingly independent. But this unexpected third child felt like a gift, a reminder that life still held surprises. "Are you happy about this?" Penelope asked one night as they lay in bed, her hand resting on the small swell of her belly. "I know we were not planning for another baby. I am happy about everything that comes from loving you," Thomas said honestly. "This child, whoever they are, will be as wanted and loved as Theo and Patricia. We will make it work, like we always do." Their third child, a son they named Timothy, arrived in late autumn of 1890, 12 years after Thomas had first come to Porterville. Timothy was a serious baby from the start, watchful and quiet, and he completed their family in a way none of them had realized was missing. Theo, now almost 13, took his role as oldest brother seriously, helping care for the baby with a maturity that made Thomas proud. Patricia doted on her baby brother, singing to him and helping her mother with all the small tasks of infant care. The house was full of life and noise and love, and Thomas often found himself stopping in the middle of work to just appreciate the sheer improbability of his happiness. He still remembered arriving in Porterville as a rootless drifter with nothing but hope and determination. He remembered watching Penelope walk into danger without hesitation and knowing that she was extraordinary. He remembered the fear and uncertainty of those early days of courtship, the joy of their wedding, the terror and wonder of becoming a father for the first time. And now here he was at 38 years old, with a wife he loved more with each passing year, 3 healthy children, a successful ranch, and a place in a community that felt like home. It was more than he had ever dreamed possible. One afternoon, when Timothy was about 2 years old, Thomas and Penelope were sitting on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Theo was teaching Patricia how to properly throw a rope to catch a fence post, while Timothy toddled around investigating everything with determined concentration. The sun was warm, the sky was clear, and the ranch spread out around them in neat productivity. "You ever think about that first day?" Thomas asked, reaching for Penelope's hand. "When you walked into that gunfight," Penelope smiled. "I think about it often. It was one of the most terrifying moments of my life, but also one of the most important. If I had not done it, Jacob might be dead. And you and I might never have truly noticed each other." "I would have noticed you," Thomas said with certainty. "You are impossible not to notice." "Maybe," she allowed, "but that moment defined something. It showed you who I was, what I valued, what I was willing to risk. And it let you show me the same things. You could have walked away, but you stepped forward ready to protect me. That told me everything I needed to know about your character." "I knew that day that I would marry you," Thomas admitted. "I watched you face down Silas Vaughn without flinching, and I knew you were the one I had been searching for without knowing it." Penelope leaned against his shoulder. "I was not as certain that quickly, but I knew there was something special about you. The way you looked at me, like you really saw me and liked what you saw. Not just my appearance, but who I was. That was rare and precious." "You are rare and precious," Thomas said, kissing the top of her head. "Every day I wake up grateful that you chose me." "We chose each other," Penelope corrected gently. "That is what makes it work. Not one person deciding, but both of us committing to build something together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children and feeling the deep contentment that came from lives well lived. Thomas knew there would be more challenges ahead. Children grew up and made their own choices, sometimes ones that worried their parents. Ranches faced uncertain markets and unpredictable weather. Bodies aged and health could not be taken for granted. Life was never simple or completely secure. But he also knew they would face those challenges together, just as they had faced everything else. Penelope was still the brave, intelligent, compassionate woman who had walked into danger to save a young man's life. Thomas was still the man who had recognized that courage and chosen to build his life around it. Their love had matured and deepened, had been tested and proven strong, had created new life and new purpose. As the years continued to pass, their children grew and developed their own personalities and dreams. Theo proved to be a natural cattleman like his father, strong and capable and patient with animals. He talked about expanding the ranch, maybe buying adjacent property and building his own house someday. Thomas encouraged him, proud of his son's ambition and work ethic, and began teaching him the more complex aspects of ranch management. Patricia, meanwhile, showed her mother's intellectual curiosity and love of learning. She excelled in school and talked about becoming a teacher like Penelope, maybe even going to a normal school for proper training. Penelope supported this dream wholeheartedly, putting aside money and making plans for Patricia's future education. Timothy, the youngest, was different from both his siblings. He had an artistic temperament, more interested in drawing the horses than riding them, more fascinated by the stories Penelope read aloud than by the practical work of the ranch. Thomas sometimes worried that Timothy would struggle to find his place in the rugged world of ranching, but Penelope reminded him that not everyone had to follow the same path. "We gave them life and love and opportunity," she said, "but we cannot dictate who they become. Timothy will find his own way, just as Theo and Patricia are finding theirs." Thomas knew she was right. He had learned over the years to trust Penelope's wisdom about people and human nature. She understood things he often missed, saw connections he overlooked. She had made him a better man, more thoughtful and patient and open to possibilities. One spring evening when Timothy was 8 years old, marking 20 years since Thomas had first come to Porterville, the whole family gathered on the porch after dinner. Theo, now 20, had been working hard all day on repairing fence line. Patricia, 17, had been helping her mother with spring cleaning. Timothy had been supposedly doing his lessons but had actually been drawing pictures of the new colt born that morning. "I want to tell you all something," Thomas said, and his family looked at him with attention. 20 years ago today, I arrived in Porterville. I had nothing but some saved money and hope for a better life. I did not know anyone, did not have a plan beyond buying land and working hard. And then I watched your mother walk into the middle of a gunfight to save a young man's life, and everything changed." Penelope smiled, her eyes soft with memory. The children had heard versions of this story before, but they always listened anyway, understanding that it was important to their parents. "Your mother showed me what courage really looks like," Thomas continued. "Not the fake bravery of men who pick fights to prove themselves, but real courage. The courage to do the right thing even when it is dangerous, to value other people's lives above your own safety, to believe that words and compassion can stop violence." I fell in love with her in that moment, and every day since then has just proven that I was right. "You are going to make me cry," Penelope said, wiping at her eyes. "I want you children to know that love like this is possible," Thomas said. "Love built on respect and shared values, on choosing each other every day, on working together through hard times. Your mother and I built this ranch and this family through partnership. We did not always agree. We had plenty of arguments and difficult moments, but we never stopped choosing each other and choosing love. We know, Papa," Patricia said gently. "You and Mama have shown us every day what a good marriage looks like. And we are grateful," Theo added. "You gave us a good home and a good example. Timothy, who was usually quiet, spoke up unexpectedly. "When I grow up, I want to find someone who looks at me the way you look at Mama," he said to Thomas. "Like she is the best thing in the whole world." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "She is," he said simply. "And I hope you all find that same kind of love when the time is right." They sat together as the stars came out, talking and laughing and simply being together as a family. Thomas looked at Penelope across the porch and found her watching him with such love and tenderness that his breath caught. 20 years, and she could still make his heart race with a single look. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Thomas and Penelope stood together in the kitchen cleaning up the last of the dinner dishes. It was a comfortable routine, one they had performed thousands of times, but tonight it felt special somehow. Perhaps because of the anniversary, or perhaps just because Thomas was acutely aware of how lucky he was. "Thank you," he said quietly, and Penelope looked up from the plate she was drying. "For what? For choosing me. For building this life with me. For being brave enough to walk into that gunfight, because if you had not, I might never have known you." Penelope set down the plate and moved into his arms. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every moment, every choice, every challenge. Because it led me here to you, to this family, to this life. I never imagined I could be this happy." Thomas held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. "I love you," he said, the words inadequate but true. "More than I can properly express." "I love you too," Penelope replied. "And I am grateful every day that you saw me that day, really saw me, and decided I was worth building a life around." They stood together in the quiet kitchen, just holding each other, and Thomas felt the deep peace that came from being exactly where he belonged. The future would bring its own challenges and joys, but they would face it together, just as they always had. The years continued their steady march forward. Theo eventually did buy adjacent land and built his own house, though he worked the combined property with Thomas as partners. He married a sensible young woman named Sarah from a nearby ranch, and they had children who became Thomas and Penelope's grandchildren, bringing new life and energy to the family. Patricia went to the normal school in San Jose and returned as a certified teacher, taking over the schoolhouse in Porterville when the previous teacher retired. She brought her mother's passion for education and her father's steady determination to the work, and the children of Porterville flourished under her instruction. She married later than most women, at 28, to a lawyer who had moved to town and appreciated her intelligence and independence. Timothy surprised everyone by showing real talent as an artist. His drawings and paintings captured the beauty of the California landscape and the character of its people, and eventually a gallery in San Francisco agreed to show his work. He split his time between Porterville and the city, never quite fitting into one world or the other, but finding his own unique path that made him happy. Thomas and Penelope watched their children build their own lives with pride and occasional worry, learning to let go while still being present when needed. They became the center of an expanding family, hosting Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations, welcoming grandchildren and eventually even great-grandchildren into their home. The ranch remained productive, though Theo gradually took over more of the day-to-day management as Thomas slowed down. Thomas did not mind. He had built something lasting, and now he could enjoy the fruits of that labor without the constant pressure of being solely responsible for its success. He and Penelope settled into the comfortable rhythms of long marriage and later life. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands and talked about everything and nothing, still found joy in each other's company after more than 30 years together. Their hair had gone gray, their bodies had softened and slowed, but the love between them remained strong and true. One afternoon in the spring of 1908, Thomas and Penelope were sitting in their usual spot on the porch when a stranger rode up to the house. He was middle-aged and well-dressed, with the bearing of someone educated and successful. He dismounted politely and approached with his hat in his hands. "Are you Thomas and Penelope Keller?" he asked. "We are," Thomas confirmed, curious. "What can we do for you?" "My name is Jacob Harper," the man said, and Thomas felt recognition dawn. "I doubt you remember me, but 30 years ago in this town, Mrs. Keller talked me out of a gunfight that would have gotten me killed." Penelope stood up, her face lighting with surprised pleasure. "Jacob, of course I remember. You were just 19 years old and about to throw your life away over a card game." "I was," Jacob agreed, "and you saved me. I have thought about that day countless times over the years, and I always meant to come back and thank you properly. I became a banker, built a good life, married and had children. None of that would have been possible if you had not intervened." "I am so glad to hear it," Penelope said warmly. "But you do not owe me thanks. I just did what needed to be done." "You did more than that," Jacob insisted. "You showed me that there were people who believed I was worth saving, that my life had value beyond my pride. That changed everything for me. So I wanted to come back and tell you that, and to say that you made a real difference in the world by being brave enough to step into that street." Thomas felt pride swell in his chest as he watched his wife accept Jacob's gratitude with grace and humility. This was who Penelope was, who she had always been. Someone who saw people in trouble and could not help but try to make things better, regardless of the cost to herself. After Jacob left, heading back to wherever his life had taken him, Thomas pulled Penelope close and kissed her forehead. "That is my wife," he said, "still changing lives decades later." "I just talked to him," Penelope protested. "You are the one who stepped forward ready to face down Silas Vaughn to protect me that second time." "We protected each other," Thomas said. "We always have. That is what makes us work." They sat together in the fading afternoon light, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. The ranch spread out around them, productive and beautiful. Their children and grandchildren were happy and thriving. They had built something real and lasting, not just in physical terms but in the love and values they had passed on to the next generations. "You have any regrets?" Penelope asked softly. Thomas considered the question seriously. "I regret that I did not find you sooner," he said. "I regret the years I wasted drifting without purpose. But I do not regret anything since the day I arrived in Porterville and saw you walk into that gunfight. From that moment forward, my life has been exactly what I wanted it to be." "Mine too," Penelope said. "I never imagined I could have all this. A husband I love and respect, children who make me proud, a home that feels safe and happy. You gave me all of that." "We gave it to each other," Thomas corrected, echoing her words from years before. As the sun set over the California valley they had made their home, Thomas and Penelope sat together in the peace of a life fully lived, and a love that had endured through every trial. They had started with a moment of courage in the middle of a dusty street, and they had built a legacy of family and community and unwavering partnership. Thomas Keller had watched Penelope Morrison talk a man out of a gunfight at noon on a hot August day in 1878, and he had known instantly that she was the one. 30 years later, he knew he had been right. She was still the one, would always be the one, the woman who had shown him what love really meant and given him a life beyond his wildest dreams. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Thomas held his wife's hand and counted himself the luckiest man who had ever lived, because he had found his home not in a place but in a person, and that had made all the difference.